Well, it has been a weekend of long lives and a week of political drama when senior leaders, a few of them, left the DA and said that they were resigning from the party and their positions. And where does this leave the party? I'm joined by Prince Mashele, political analyst. He's based in Johannesburg. He's with us in our studio. And from Cape Town, we're joined by Silke, the political commentator. I'm inviting you to join the network with your comments using the hashtag the Modise Network. As I've said, drama all over the place, but somehow not that much expected, right? Let me start with you, Prince. People will think that Mmusi actually sold the DA out. What is your view?
No, Mmusi didn't sell the DA out. The beginning of this drama was in May during the elections. The outcome of the election suggested that the DA is a dwindling part. And why? There are two components of voters who did not vote for the DA. The first component is a component of white, in the main, far-right wingers who went to vote for the Freedom Front Plus. And the second component are black people who did not vote for the DA. So after the elections, the political bosses of the DA met and tried to take stock of what was happening to their party. They were mainly worried about the component that left the DA to vote for the Freedom Front Plus. So from that moment on, they wanted Mmusi Maimane out. Why? Because they calculated that the white voters were not happy with him. One, because he is black. Two, because of what they perceived to be his weaknesses. So that's the origin of it. So since May, up to where we are, the DA has been a party in flux. So what we have witnessed of late is actually an outcome of that long process.
Well, Daniel, I'd like you to weigh in here because it appears Mmusi Maimane had not made up his mind as to how he wanted to respond to what Prince has just mentioned here. First, he said he will step down as the leader, but will stay on as leader of the DA in Parliament. And that at some unknown future time, the speculation was that he would resign from the DA. But now he has resigned as DA member, DA MP, and DA, all his positions in the DA. What do you think forced his hand in this manner?
Well, Tim, I think, ultimately he had to respond to the DA's own internal review panel that had made it crystal clear as to where the blame should lie. The real problem, from my opinion anyway, is that the voters didn't vote en masse for the DA in May. This was the symptom, the resignation was the symptom of a weak election result and frankly the symptom of a series of political blunders, not just, I might add, from the desk of Mr Maimane, but a series of messaging blunders, policy confusion blunders as well, practical errors in local governance around the country, which has plagued the party over the last 2 to 3 years or so. We're simply seeing the culmination of this. I think, for Mr Maimane, probably he should have, frankly, taken responsibility already earlier, just after the election result was known, because by holding on to power, ultimately, he has allowed another 6 months of confusion to reign within the DA, and many of the other aspects that we will probably discuss, the introduction of Helen Zille back into the equation, the ongoing sort of malaise around race and liberal philosophy and ideology, that's festered whilst, of course, Mr Maimane has been holding on to his position. So I do think that the timing of his departure now, 6 months after the election, more or less, perhaps got the DA into even more trouble. And we saw that as a result of the drop in voter support for the DA on an almost weekly basis in local government elections. It's the same old story. When you're doing well at the polls, people like you and you're a hero. When you don't do well at the polls, I'm afraid to say, and there are a host of reasons, and many of them I think we're going to cover, then I think your days are numbered. Mr Maimane finally, I think, owned up to it. And unfortunately for him, he's found out that politics is indeed a pretty cruel game to be involved in.
Yeah, and of course, anything can happen in politics. For now, I've asked questions about Mmusi Maimane as the leader of the DA, but it appears that there are even bigger problems within the organization? I mean, what would have triggered, for instance, the departure of Herman Mashaba? In his case, it was instant and summary type departure. Athol Trollip also saying that he's going to step down and follow Mmusi Maimane out of the political party. That tells us there's something brewing within the DA that's not so good. What is it then that is playing out in the DA, you think,
Look,
Prince?
there is something brewing in the DA that is bigger than just the election results. Number one, there's been an ideological tussle internal in the DA. There is a grouping that defines itself as the real liberal faction of the party. And that grouping has been feeling that the party has been veering away from its liberal core. Mashaba, Mmusi, and in the main other black leaders have actually not conducted themselves in the party as the real core liberals. They understood that part of the DA's agenda as an inclusive South African party is to bring everybody on board to address historical injustices, for example. I mean, Mashaba, when he resigned, he did say that there were people in the party who felt that his pro-poor policies that he has been implementing in Johannesburg are actually veering off the agenda of the DA. So there is that core ideological tussle. So the grouping that sees itself as the liberal custodian of the DA, in the main, is white. It doesn't understand this whole thing about addressing the needs of the poor. They actually think that the DA is a party that must safeguard the interests of white. And white people, as we know, they are largely middle class and rich. So there's a clash as to what is the space of a poor person in the DA. That is the fundamental struggle. And it would appear to me that the black leaders who see themselves as custodians of addressing the historical injustice, they decided, you know what, this is not the place for that.
But let me stay with you just briefly before I go to Daniel Silke. I mean, the support that was lost by the DA to the Freedom Front Plus, for instance, the 500,000 white voters who left the DA to support a Freedom Front Plus. Would they do so for liberal reasons?
Well, they would do so for reasons related to the liberal ideology. I'll tell you how. So, if the interpretation of the liberal ideology is that advance and protect the interests of the rich, right? Liberalism allows that, right? And they see that the leadership of the party under Mmusi Maimane is actually veering away from that. That would give them reason to be worried and think that this party that they joined has actually changed course. So, if you were to talk to each one of them who didn't vote for the DA, they would probably not even understand the nuances of the liberal ideology. But all they interpret are the messages that come from the inner kitchen of the DA.
Sure.
The messages have been broadly pro-poor, as articulated by Mmusi and as articulated by leaders like Herman Mashaba.
Okay, well, Daniel, what is your view of what Prince is telling me here now, especially when you think of the fact that the CEO of the DA also resigned and Athol Trollip also resigned? Then I wonder if they would resign for the reasons that Prince Mashele is advancing here. What do you think?
Well, I will differ with my friend Prince that I'm a strong believer that liberal values can indeed uplift the poor, and it's not a binary choice. Liberal values can, and I think do, have a major place to play in uplifting the poor and reducing inequality. But I think there's sort of other factors at play here. For Mr Micawber, because that's the question that you asked, I think, originally. Firstly, I think Mr Micawber is somewhat of a maverick character. I think someone who brought a substantial an interest to the DA. May I just say this about Mr Micawber? I think that he expanded, in a sense, the brand of the DA. He wasn't a traditional DA member in terms of his philosophy. We've seen him be quite conservative on issues like immigration, very strong on free market principles, given his own particular personal background. And I do think that he brought with him a substantial interest that was lacking in the DA. So, in effect, when we look at the resignation of Maimane and Trollip, for that matter, The resignation that matters more to me in terms of the DA in the last week has been Mr Mashaba, and I think the DA is going to miss that something special, that something extra, no matter how much of a maverick he was. But I think we must also look at some peculiar factors for the city of Johannesburg. There was an unwieldy and difficult coalition with the EFF. The review panel looking into the reasons for the poor performance of the DA has suggested that that agreement, whatever it is, with the EFF was not helping the party, broadly speaking, and whilst it helped keep Mr Mashaba with the mayoral chain around his neck, it didn't really resonate with many of the DA supporters. And perhaps when you talk about some of those 450,000 supporters who left, largely white supporters, many of them found it a little bit unpalatable that two political parties so diametrically opposed, like the DA and the EFF, could find some working ground together. And I think that type of coalition building, which the DA has been historically quite good at, came unstuck, because certainly these two parties were really two parties that were the very opposite end of the South African political spectrum.
Well, thank you for that observation, Daniel, because, Prince, I want to ask you this question on the back of the performance of Herman Mashaba as mayor of Joburg. A lot of people who live in Johannesburg would suggest that they thought that the government of Joburg under Mashaba, the council under Mashaba, was working relatively well for the residents of the of this city. So if there are views within the DA, as explained by Daniel, then it suggests that we live in different worlds, I suppose, right? With different people experience and view things differently. Everybody knew it was a coalition government, but it was taken for granted that it will run its course until the next round of local government elections.
I have been following Mayor Mashaba to communities, various communities in Johannesburg, as part of my job as a political analyst, and it was very interesting. So if you went to Zandspruit, for example, I followed him to Zandspruit. He was hugely popular, and there he was delivering VIP toilets to the poor, hugely popular. And then I followed him to Randburg, in a white neighborhood. There the whites were very critical of him because they thought that his government was missing in action, that his government was not cutting grass. And I remember at one point he asked them, do you want me to prioritize cutting grass over giving toilets to people without dignity? So here is the thing about South Africa. We live in different realities. So the 400 plus white South Africans who did not vote for the DA, they actually don't give a damn about people who live in poor communities who don't have toilets. So the question is, what do you do if you're a political party, if you're a political leader? You are faced with this reality of a whole mass of black people who are poor. Do you ignore them and cut grass? That is the question. Mashaba decided to distribute toilets. So you are right. Mashaba is usually popular among black people in Johannesburg, and actually they thought that his government was doing well. But extremely unpopular among the people my colleague refers to as DA supporters, whites, who felt that he was neglecting cutting grass. That is the issue. And this issue is related to ideology.
Yeah. Okay, we pick up the conversation and ask the question whether the DA is ready to mold a party that will represent one South Africa for all. We'll continue our conversation after the break. Don't go away, and share your thoughts with us on the hashtag the Modise Network.